Welcome to the Interfire Climbing Podcast. This is Jesse Firestone. My guest on the podcast today is Michael Hauss. Michael is a friend of mine and at times a client of mine, and I wanted to have him on the podcast for a few reasons. Primarily because when I would work with Michael as a client, we would have really interesting discussions that kind of spiraled into unexpected topics, and that tends to be pretty fun for a podcast. Michael has an interesting athletic background and climbing history, and he's also the founder of a new climbing gym, a new type of climbing gym coming to Seattle called ROQ, ROQ. I will let you find out more about that in the show, but that was one reason that I wanted to have him on, because a lot of people have asked me about the format of this new gym and what I thought about it. And I thought it would just be easiest to have him on and just hear it straight from the horse's mouth. So there's quite a bit of discussion about climbing gyms and what makes a climbing gym good. And there's actually quite a bit of overlap between what he's trying to do with ROQ and what I'm trying to do with my coaching. So, maybe more overlap than people would expect. And as is habit, we just kind of dove straight into the deep end and I turned the recording on, but there's no introduction or how do you do at the beginning of the podcast. We just dive straight into it, and that is where I will leave you. I promise you it will go interesting places from there. So please enjoy this conversation with Michael Hauss.
Yeah, no, I've been to Bend. It's a nice place. I actually checked out the board gym there, Boardworks, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
Yeah. I liked it. I think at a high level, it kind of bears some semblance to what ROQ is, right? It's a board gym. But at kind of some more fundamental levels, it's quite different than what ROQ actually is. I think it's more of a, it's like a training facility, very self-directed, though they do actually, have a decent amount of programming because I'm still on the email list. So they actually do have like set nights and competitions and all that style of stuff. But it felt like a very much kind of, hey, this is a 24-hour gym. You come in, you do your own thing type of thing, versus ROQ, which is, kind of a little more unambiguous by default, I suppose.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I haven't climbed in Boardworks. I was in there before they opened, just chatting with Lily once, the owner.
Yeah.
But I think what I found really attractive about that model, and maybe we'll talk about this with ROQ too, is just like all the stuff that I wasn't paying for. Like there's just so much stuff in a commercial gym that I don't feel like I need to pay for. So that seems cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of seems like the way that she built the gym, and obviously I don't want to speak for her, but as she started with sort of the bare bones and then kind of based on what customers were saying, implemented the most useful features. So she's like, okay, we start with just the boards. Okay, I think we need a squat rack. Okay, I think we need a sauna because people really love saunas. So instead of building like 6 cafes in the gym, she, stripped it down to the essentials of what people, what a certain demographic of people definitely want. So I think that's pretty cool.
That's what I do in my garage, right? It's like, okay, I need space for this thing, therefore I must sell my e-bike or whatever. It's like something, it's like there's a give and take of like how much stuff I can fit up there. It's not a very big garage. So
okay, yeah, it touches on this theme of I think as climbing grows, it's not surprising to me that the commercial offerings, particularly gyms, become more specific and they cater to kind of, I don't want to say niche demographics, but more specific demographics. It's hard to now have a climbing gym that caters to everybody in climbing because climbing is sufficiently big that people want different things. So it's not surprising to me that that's developing in that way.
Totally. I mean, having been at the new Portland ROQ gym, Beaverton, I think they had like 2 or 3 stages of construction, but the last time I was there, everything was open, and it's like being on a campus. It's like, I honestly still haven't seen the whole gym because I just didn't take the time to walk through the whole, like, it's just so overwhelming. You start to go look at a new corner of the gym and like you get hung up looking at something else and you forget. And there's just whole areas that I still haven't been to. It's so, have you been to that gym or seen it?
I haven't been there, but CWA was there. But I was only there in CWA that year for like that day. I drove like it got there at like 1 a.m. the night before, and then left that next night, so I didn't get a chance to check it out. But I think, wasn't it built in an old Home Depot or Target or one of those
Something
mega
like that.
stores?
Yeah.
Which kind of
Something
gives
really
a
big.
sense in my mind of the scale, because
Yeah.
if if you're in a Target, you can't see the other side of the Target. From one side of the Target, it's like almost like an amusement park.
Yeah, it is. And it's
Yeah.
like, it has so many, like it has, the thing that really blew my mind was it had a outdoor boulder. So there's like, maybe it was where like the garden center was for the Home Depot or something, because those are often covered too. But it's like you actually go outside and there's a whole boulder that you can go to all sides of, and it's covered, but it's outside. So in winter you have like temps basically, and I was there in winter, and I was like, oh my god, I want to be out here. It's like 70 degrees inside the gym. I would way rather, and I actually climbed quite a bit better on the outdoor boulder than I did on the indoor boulders. I was like, wow, if I lived here, this would be where I would be doing my projects for sure. It's super interesting.
Have you ever been to Sheffield
No.
in the United Kingdom? Okay, the reason I brought it up is just because it's I went to this gym there. I think it was the Depot. It was one of the newer gyms, but it was winter. It was February, and they had no heat. It was legitimately 45 degrees Fahrenheit in this gym, and I had to warm up in a puffy. And I climbed well because it was conditions, as you said, but it was kind of hard to weightlift in that style of gym because it was 45 degrees.
Yeah, I actually have heard that that's a thing in like a lot of European gyms, but especially the UK gyms, that they don't heat them because the conditions are better. And I'm like, what are we doing in America that we're pumping heat into the commercial gyms?
Yeah, there's a lot of regulations that suggest that you have to do that. I know actually there's been a lot of debates, and I'm not super familiar with the details of these debates, but for fitness spaces in general, to enable them to be quote unquote unconditioned spaces. Because there's a lot of permitting things that come as a result of having to condition spaces, and it leads to like much more significant kind of construction projects. And gyms are making the argument, well, like we want people to work out as if it's outside, so like why do we need to condition this space? We don't even have locker rooms. Like, what's the point of building a multi-million-dollar HVAC system when we're not even going to use it? And so I know there's some debate going on there, but I don't know the details of that.
It is interesting to me that as climbing expands, we might see an evolution where climbing gyms stop getting classed under like fitness facilities, because I think that's I don't know what else they would really be, but it is weird to like lump them into the same category as like a place where people go to like lift weights, or swing kettlebells around or whatever. It's not really the same thing as that, and I guess. I don't even know. Maybe you know something about what it's like for other sports. Are they all zoned the same and everything?
Well, I guess to step back a second, so the comment that I would make on that is that I think some climbing gyms will certainly not be in that classification, and then some climbing gyms will be even more squarely in that classification. I think the point that I kind of feel is that as climbing grows, there will be a greater diversity of options, some that will be classified as X and some that will be classified as Y. And some people have, the need for pure fitness, and the climbing gym will look very much like a traditional lifting gym. And some people have the need for pure social time, and that gym might look very different than the gym that's kind of more focused on training and fitness, let's say. And I think climbing gyms in some capacities fall into fitness, and some capacities don't. And I think that's a challenge of all the permitting stuff with the city, as well as like, people who are not familiar with climbing want to classify it in all sorts of different ways that has a bunch of derivative requirements that are sometimes untenable. For example, not to go off too far on a tangent, but like I'm aware of, a climbing gym where they're trying to classify the walls as play structures, right? And so one of the derivative requirements of play structures is that you need clearance on all sides, but the walls are attached to the building walls, so that's literally impossible. So you end up in this weird sort of stalemate with the city or whatever governing body that is issuing permits, and then you have to think again about, okay, well, actually, I don't think it was right to classify these structures as play structures. Let's try again. So yeah, climbing gyms are kind of unique in that way. They share elements of all sorts of different entertainment experiences, gyms, all sorts of different domains.
Yeah. I guess I'm like, in my head, I'm picturing all the different gyms that I've spent time in. And, there's like the Portland Rock Gym would be at one extreme, basically, like that we were just talking about, where I don't even know what the square footage is, but it's massive. It is like being a Home Depot or something. It's probably bigger than a Home Depot because I think they annexed quite a bit of space to the side to build well, because like the sport walls, if you think about it, are much, much taller than your average like box store, right? They're like 60 feet tall or something like that. So I'm sure they had to build a bespoke building for that. But
that's true. Yeah.
And then on the other side of the equation, you have like, I started in a racquetball court, which was on a college campus, so probably didn't have any zoning requirements or whatever. But very much, you had to like duck through the door to get into the facility. It's like a racquetball court. It's not at all supposed to be and then you have things like the Squamish Athletic Club springs to mind. I'm not sure if you've been there, but it's like the second story above a preschool or something. So it's mostly a weight gym, and then they've like built a TB2 and a spray wall, but they're like, you can lift weights in here, but like you can't do powerlifting style where you like rip the concentric and then drop the bar, because they're like worried that it would like, go through the floor or that it's at the very least going to be like super inconvenient for this like school that's below them. And it kind of is a wide range of different like types of facilities that you're sort of accommodating, and an increasing range over time, because gyms are starting to do new and different things, which is why you're here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, sort of two thoughts on that. One is that I'm also aware that a number of the board companies are putting boards in, say, apartment complexes. And so do you consider that a gym? In some sense, let's say the Kilter board is a gym in and of itself that just kind of goes into apartment complex. So that was kind of my first thought, is that, you have this kind of wide range of what a facility could actually be. But I think we're actually talking about two sort of different scales. So there's the wide range of what a facility can be, and then there's a wide range of kind of customer needs. And so there's somewhat independent scales. You can have two facilities that look exactly the same, but one includes training by default and programming and coaches and all these things, and it's serving a different need than a facility that looks exactly the same but is 100% open gym 24 hours. You come do your own thing and there's no guidance whatsoever.
So is that first example that you're talking about, you mean like there's a 20-story apartment building in downtown Seattle, and instead of just having a cable stack and a dumbbell tree, they also have a kilter board in the lobby? Is that what you're talking about?
Sort of, though I think sometimes the kilter boards or the boards in general may not be treated exactly as a fitness apparatus. And so the apartment complex may look at it as some combination of a fitness apparatus and a social community building space. And so, to be honest, I can't speak exactly for why an apartment complex would be incentivized to want to put that there. I mean, I guess it's just an amenity, and it's maybe a differentiating amenity. But yeah, they're not treating it exactly the same as, say, a Smith machine. They're treating it as kind of a separate amenity, in the sense that a ping pong table might be a separate amenity.
Right. It is kind of close to a play structure in that sense.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I guess I didn't think about that, but it totally makes sense, because the boards are they're independent of the like creativity and the abstractness that you get with a climbing gym, where like every time you walk into a climbing gym, you have all the different terrain and the route setters are very different and everything. And you just strip all that down and you have something that's very like portable and gamified. Like it's almost like having like a Pac-Man machine in the apartment building, It's like very self-contained in terms of what you need to do.
Totally. Yeah.
Interesting directions that the sport is taking.
Also another random point, but I would push back almost a little bit against the idea that setting in a normal gym, let's say, is infinitely creative and the board is not infinitely creative. I actually think not that a board is infinitely creative in the same way that setting is, but I think sometimes it can provide the stable ground to create on top of that. And so I think that's one way to frame ROQ as well. It's like, okay, you take a bunch of these things that can be considered constants and you have less variables, and now you iterate kind of the programming on top of that, and you iterate the facility, you iterate all these other variables that enable you to build on top of this stable structure. And so I think it's hard to do everything well at once. Like, it's hard to change everything and have success. So it's kind of cool to be able to fix certain things and then kind of iterate from there.
I think that makes sense. I'm going to butcher the quote, but I think it was Oscar Wilde said something to the effect of like, there can be no art without limitations. Like, it's a lot easier to create something out of some basic building blocks than it is to create something with just a blank page. But I'm no artist, so.
Nor am I in any sort of traditional sense. Also kind of reminiscent of talking about form in art. Like, form obviously plays a role in art. It's not completely free. There are constraints. And, you know, I actually like this saying, and we're going in all sorts of different directions. I think, we can think about what we're going to talk about next, but I actually like and was inspired by, so I worked at Amazon for a couple years, and they have this idea of leadership principles. And one of their leadership principles is frugality. And the expansion of that leadership principle is constraints breed resourcefulness. You don't get more by spending more, basically. And so this idea of constraining or limiting yourself in certain ways can actually breed innovation. And in sort of Amazon opinion, it's actually a prerequisite for innovation. If the world is completely open to you, it's hard to kind of innovate. So you have to fix certain things.
Yeah. I guess Sam Altman has not gotten this memo, but that's a totally different type of podcast. Okay, Michael, thanks. This is that's probably the deepest I've ever jumped in on a podcast, but that's exactly why I wanted to have you on the show. So let's pull it back a little bit. Tell the people who you are and why. How did you get here? Who are you and how did you get here?
Yeah. That's a broad question that can probably be approached in a number of different ways. I met you originally because I sought you out for coaching, I believe, for the first time in 2023, when I had gotten back from a year of traveling the world to climb. I sought you out in particular for coaching at that time because I felt that I was stronger than I was good. And you seem to be a very thoughtful and technical climber, and I wanted to kind of learn some of those things from you. And you were a Washington-based climber, so I felt that you had knowledge specific to a lot of the sort of challenges that I wanted to take on in Washington. And so that's kind of why I originally sought you out for coaching. We've since done a few different training plans together, and I've always enjoyed sort of our deeper, almost philosophical discussions on climbing. I tend to bias in that direction as well, sort of like overanalyzing sometimes. Maybe it's not overanalysis, but I certainly like thinking about, everything, but climbing in particular. I like thinking about climbing.
Our check-ins regularly ran over their allotted time into however much time I had available because there's a lot to talk about. So that is definitely part of why you're here. But how about from the other side? How did you get started climbing? Let's start there.
Yeah, so my journey into climbing was somewhat interesting. So I was a competitive swimmer through all of my kind of youth. I was a D1 athlete. I swam for Princeton in New Jersey. And Princeton is kind of an interesting university when it comes to swimming. So Ivy League schools don't provide athletic scholarships. And so a lot of the Ivy League schools tend to recruit top classes in the country, but they are often not the best teams in the country because often people use athletics to get into those schools for other reasons. And so you end up recruiting a lot of the people that are kind of burnt out on the sport, I shouldn't say burnt out, but are not necessarily interested in becoming professional athletes in that sport, but use the sport to attain other goals, let's say. And so I would put myself a little bit in that camp. I never really loved swimming. I was good at it. I didn't really love it. I had the realization probably around 16 or 17 that I was very likely to not make a career out of swimming. I was very likely to not make the Olympics. And so I decided to, take my life, let's say, in a different direction, to leverage swimming for other means. And so that's why I decided to go to Princeton. And so I was already a little bit disillusioned with the sport of swimming when I got there. And so kind of the next step in that journey was that my sophomore year, Princeton offers this program called IIP, International Internship Program. and I sort of sought out the most out there place that I could possibly go. I was a software engineer for an environmental research NGO in Nepal. And I sought out that job because I wanted to go to Nepal. I was like, wow, Nepal's super different. That would be, really cool. As a part of that, I was like, okay, Nepal has the Himalayas. It would be cool to climb a mountain when I was there. And so I researched these guided, expeditions that you could do. And I chose a mountain that went the opposite way of Everest because I didn't want to see anybody. And I wanted to do the most unique, whatever mountaineering experience. And as a part of that, I was like, maybe I should prepare for this in some capacity. And so I went to the school's climbing gym, which was a vertical wall in a football pillar. And it was like that old faux rock texture type of thing. Yeah. Only vertical routes. There was no bouldering. You could technically lead in there, but I think I only did that maybe once. And this was much later on. So it's pretty much just top roping. The routes were set by students who were on average relatively inexperienced at setting much of anything. And at the time, I was like, okay, well, I got to learn these skills because I'm going to go climb this mountain. Little did I know they were pretty irrelevant at the time. Like the mountain I did was a glacier walk. And the climbing
off by
gym,
about like 45 degrees of steepness usually.
Yeah, like almost completely independent pursuits at that level. But that's what got me into the climbing gym the first time.
Yeah.
And I guess technically I'd been to a climbing gym, for a birthday party when I was younger. And actually I had a birthday party that involved a climbing wall at a 24-hour fitness when I was 7. But I was never particularly hooked on climbing at that age. Yeah, it was a very tall climbing wall too. So this was it would have been the year 2000. So that's actually kind of interesting. They had like a 60-foot climbing wall and a 24-hour fitness. Anyway, I'll have to contact that 24-hour fitness and see what inspired them to do that if it's still there. So I entered the climbing gym kind of for that reason. And I was initially hooked on climbing because I was bad at it. And I was strong from swimming. And I was like, I thought of myself as a good athlete. And climbing was hard. I was like, wow, these people who are much weaker than me are climbing harder than me. Like, I got to figure this out. Like, what's going on here? And so that was kind of the initial hook that sort of brought me in. It was that I was bad at it. And I wanted to get better and learn kind of how to get up these things that people who, couldn't do as many pull-ups as I could were getting up. And so that was like, I went to the climbing gym, let's say like 6 or 7 times that spring. That was in the spring of 2013. I went to Nepal. I did this mountain. Technically in Nepal, I went to a climbing wall. I was in Kathmandu for 3 months. I went to a climbing wall there. I went on what is in retrospect a pretty dangerous guided outdoor outing in sport climbing in Nepal, which now when I look back on the safety practice, like they were belaying with those, I don't even know what they're called, the 8 devices, the
8 plate. Yeah.
The 8 plate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, I was like sort of getting into climbing. I was interested in it. And then I came back to school in the fall of 2013 and, fully intent on swimming that season. And there was a club at school that was called like the outdoor, it was called the Mountaineering Club. But anyway, they were going on a bouldering trip to the Gunks because that was kind of the closest major climbing destination to Princeton. And I was like, sure, why not? I'll go. That seems kind of interesting. And so literally first time bouldering either in a gym or outdoors, I had a pretty serious injury. And so there were a bunch of factors that led to this injury. But basically, and I'm not sure, I think I've told you this story before, or maybe not.
Well, I'll let you say what the injury is.
Yeah. That kind of sounds like the answer is probably not, because it was a very significant injury. So I was trying to top out a boulder. I threw a heel up. My heel stayed on the rock. My hands did not. I was topping out into pine needles, and there was only one pad. I was with more experienced climbers, and they probably had some responsibility for looking out for me a little bit more. I was kind of unaware of what my body was doing. But anyway, my body hit the pad, my head did not. And I went out cold. I was helicopter evac from the Gunks, and I was in a medically induced coma for 6 days in the hospital for quite a bit longer. And at the time, Princeton did not allow you to take just one semester off. And so while I ended up recovering and I got super lucky to have no residual effects or anything really that that kind of horrible. That was a downstream effect of this. So I recovered and recovered is kind of like a gradient, but I was more or less okay, let's say, a month and a half later. But Princeton didn't allow you to take just a semester off. So I had this year in front of me, and I was pretty bold, and I'd just been to Nepal, and I was like, okay, I want to, do more of this type of stuff. And interestingly, because, the same kind of principles that were originally getting me into climbing still sort of consumed me. I was still interested in climbing. I didn't remember the head injury in any capacity whatsoever. So I had no sort of inherent reservation as a result of that head injury from climbing. And so wow.
You don't mean like in a alpinists have bad short-term memory way. You mean you actually couldn't remember that you fell?
I could remember that. I could remember up until seconds before the injury, okay. But I have no recollection of any sort of pain or trauma or fear as a result of that injury, like complete blackout, no memory.
Interesting.
And maybe it's within me at some level and somehow I'll figure out how to access it. But, I've done a number of things in my life, that would have probably accessed that memory if it was there, and I haven't seen it come up. And so it's kind of funny, this, and this is a little bit off topic, I'll bring it back quickly, but it's kind of funny how memory in that regard, like I had this memory of this accident just based on the stories I tell about the accident after the fact, which are almost certainly not the ground truth because I don't remember it. So it's like my memory was formed as a result of the stories I told and what people told me about this event. But I actually have no inherent, core feeling associated with this event. I really don't know what it was like. And people told me I was in pain, and
That's like super interesting to me, partly because I think that there's maybe somebody who knows more about this can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I want to say that like memory is always fabricated, and every time you remember something, there's a little bit of like a rewrite that happens. And my way of interacting with that in my own mind is like there's injuries that I talk about that happened in the past where I am very casual about them, even if they were pretty bad. And I feel like as they've gotten further in the rearview mirror, they feel more and more casual. So it's like, I fell and like did this thing, and my back hurts sometimes, but like it's fine. I don't really worry about it too much. Like I had a pretty bad neck injury, and I feel like for the most part that's like faded in the rearview mirror. And there are other injuries, like when I hurt my nerve on my arm, that I'm like, well, that was probably the worst pain I've ever experienced. I say that every time I talk about that injury, and so I actually do remember it as being pretty bad. And I wonder sometimes how much of that is just the self-fulfilling, like the way that I talk about it when I sort of remember it. I mean, I can't imagine having something like that I just don't have I don't have a physical memory of the actual sensation. I'm sure it would be just filled in by assumptions.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of ways I think to think about this stuff. And I think at kind of the base layer, there's sensations, right? So there's like, these physical almost impulses that your body can take in. And then there's, narrative that's built on top of that. And then there's, narratives that are built on top of the narratives. And you can certainly experience more pain as a result of something being emotionally significant to you. Like your finger is probably, if you rupture a pulley, it'd probably be more painful to a climber than it would be to someone for whom that injury is not as relevant, because you kind of carry all this emotional pain with the finger injury as well. So to kind of bring it back to my journey in climbing there is, I had that kind of significant injury. I then went home to California about a month and a half later, and I traveled probably before it was advisable to travel, but I was stuck in New York, and thankfully I have family in New York. And so I was able to kind of hang out there with my mom and my grandma at the time. So then I made it back to California, and I was immediately planning like, okay, what do I do next? And so I started going to a climbing gym with a high school friend, just because, like I said, that arc kind of stayed with me. I was interested in climbing, and, I kind of continue to be interested in climbing, and sort of, especially at that time, like another factor that got me kind of hooked was that at the time, the only climbing gym I had really been to was the climbing wall at the university. And the closest gym to my parents in Southern California was Center One. And it was this crazy like amusement park of a gym. And I think at the time when it was built, it was pretty avant-garde for climbing gyms. And so that was super cool. I was like, wow, the walls are 65 feet tall, and there's this crazy ice cream cone feature, and this is stimulating in all sorts of different ways. And so I kind of got hooked for that reason. But I was also just I was interested in doing big, bold things. And so Princeton has a scholarship that basically enables rising juniors to pursue alternative forms of learning. And so I was like, let me leverage this scholarship to fund a climbing trip. Like, I think that would be super interesting. And so in order to apply to this scholarship, you basically had to plan out this entire climbing trip. And in the end, I was not actually, there were, some kind of pedantic things that led me to be disqualified from this scholarship, specifically that I had already started my junior year, so I couldn't actually be considered a rising junior. But I had planned out this entire climbing trip, and this was in Peru for like 9 months later. And I had committed to doing some pretty bold ascents with this very talented climber in Peru with basically no mountaineering experience. So I sort of exaggerated my experience to get connected with this climber in Peru because I was bold. I was 20 years old. I thought I could do anything. I thought I couldn't die. And that, I had a ton of aerobic fitness from swimming. I was like, yeah, I can tough it out. No worries. And as soon as I did that, I got extremely nervous. And I was like, wow, what did I just commit myself to? And so that was kind of a motivating factor of getting myself better at these kind of things. So on that front, I planned a trip to, I did my research of so where can I train for mountaineering basically? And so I spent 5 months in New Zealand, and I got I guess you could call it an internship, but it was sort of contract work as a software engineer at another environmental research. This time it was not an NGO, but an environmental research company in New Zealand, and called Landcare Research. And I got this kind of job there through an alumni, and I spent a lot of that time trying to prepare for, this mountaineering expedition that I was about to do. So I joined the mountaineering club at the University of Auckland. I went climbing outdoors every weekend, mostly sport climbing. I made a number of trips down to the South Island. I took this 2-week-long mountaineering course. I went back to the South Island and did a bunch of alpine rock climbing. I was trying to get into it kind of as quickly as possible. I then came home to California, and I hired a guide to do this route in the Sierras. It's called Ice 9. It's sort of the next step up in sort of technical mountaineering. But I was scared. I was like, I am going to die based on what I've committed myself to. This guy wanted to climb a new route on Hirishanka, which is this incredibly difficult mountain. It's the subject of a book and a movie called Touching the Void. That's kind of an interesting movie. And so, I had got myself in way over my head. Thankfully, it all kind of turned out. So then I went to Peru for 3 months. The first mountain that we did was not particularly, technically difficult. That was, on the higher side. It was 63 or 6,400 meters. It was called Ausangate. And then we kind of proceeded to kind of up the ante a little bit with each kind of expedition. And the guy that I got connected with, while a talented climber, he was not particularly discerning in his partners. I think he was, happy to have me along. He was, he couldn't really find other partners, and I was psyched and I was fit. And so I made it work. And thankfully we weren't doing anything overly technical at that time. This sort of ended in me doing a first ascent of a mountain out there called Nevado Umantai, which is, moderately technical, like 70-degree sort of ice and snow and vertical steps of ice, certainly. And then, I had a couple more sort of mountaineering. Yeah, there's a couple more sort of mountaineering expeditions that I did. After that, returned, went back to school, swam that year, and I actually really did not want to go back to school that year. At this point, I was like, I'm going to be a mountaineer full time. This is one of the few decisions my parents directly opposed me on. And something I didn't mention was that it's quite insane that my parents allowed me to go to do these mountaineering expeditions after just having this head injury. I think nobody really knew what was involved. I think that's part of it. Ignorance was certainly part of the equation here. And I was pretty bullheaded. My parents knew that, it would been pretty hard to directly oppose. I was going to do it no matter what, so they might as well support me. But anyway, I wanted to not go back to school. I was going to participate in an expedition to Kanchenjunga, which is the third highest mountain in the world in the Himalayas, with that same climbing partner. And my parents were like, no, you need to go back to school. And that was like maybe the only decision that my parents directly sort of, as an adult, opposed me on. They're like, no, you need to go back to school. And I was like, in retrospect, great idea. It was good that I graduated, led to all sorts of other positive things in my life. So I went back to school. I swam that year, not because, I kind of knew my swimming career at that point was over, but all my friends are still on the swim team. So I wanted to swim as sort of a social thing and to stay in contact with all my friends. So I swam that year. And then at the end of that swimming season, I made the decision to quit for my senior year. And at that point, I got full-time into climbing. And that became my main activity. And kind of I slowly relinquished this interest in mountaineering as I realized how time-consuming it was and how difficult it would be to pursue that style of activity with full-time job and full-time going to school. And so I really got into rock climbing. Then I moved to Seattle. My first job out of college was at Microsoft. I was a product manager for a kind of more technical product. I studied computer science, and I was always sort of interested in computer science, but I was a product manager because I wanted to eventually start my own business. So anyway, Microsoft, and then I joined SBP and sort of got introduced to a more modern style of climbing. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. But at the time, still primarily a sport climber. And then COVID kind of facilitated my transition into bouldering as it became harder to find partners during COVID. And so I was like, okay, I'll get into this bouldering thing. And that's 2020 was when I really started getting more into bouldering. And so this is the whole arc of my climbing experience. And now I've been mostly bouldering for the last 4 to 5 years. I think that the last kind of relevant part of this experience is that, I worked at a number of the tech companies, and then my wife and I, Haley, we decided to take a sort of sabbatical from the summer of 2022 to the fall of 2023. And we went everywhere in the world climbing. So we hit a number of destinations. We were in Rocklands twice. We went to Turkey, to Kalymnos, to Rediar in Spain, to Albarracin, to Font twice. And we also went to Japan and Korea and Thailand. We would climb outside in those locations, but traveled the world climbing. And then we came back in fall of 2023. Yeah.
It's thanks for the exposition, because I feel like you definitely covered. I gave you a very broad question, and you covered the whole arc of the question for sure. I think it's always interesting to me how often I speak to people who start out wanting the big objectives of like going up mountains and stuff, and end up bouldering or sometimes sport climbing, because they're just like, they just condense a lot more of what's actually fun about that, and like the joy of movement and all that stuff down into something that's like much more practical or realistic. Like it feels when you're going to go do a big expedition, I'm sure, when you were 20 and you were going to Peru, or 20-ish, I might not have the age totally right. I'm sure it felt like just this huge, super exciting thing, to take a couple months off and go do that. But it's like you kind of quickly realize, I can't actually do that like several times a year without having a trust fund or something. Not really having anything else going on in my life. And I actually feel the same way about even just climbing trips. Like I'm lucky to have done as many big climbing and bouldering trips as I've done. But now the further I get into my life, the more I'm like, wow, it's pretty hard to like interrupt your life constantly with like 1 or 2 month, blips where you're just not taking care of any of the responsibilities that you have, and I'm probably extremely on this side of doing that more often maybe than I should, and sacrificing a lot of other things in life to make space for that. But yeah, it is a big sacrifice for sure. So it makes sense that you would kind of shift to the more convenient disciplines and find yourself into bouldering, which again, as you mentioned earlier, is how we wound up meeting, because you kind of came back from that trip, and I forget exactly what your goals were the first time we worked together, but I remember talking to you quite a lot about some of the harder problems you had done in Rocklands, and that you had found yourself doing a lot of like dynos. And I think at that time you hadn't done Rainbow. I think you went back to Font the following spring and did it. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. I'm just like out of sheer personal interest, because I've climbed quite a few V11 or 8A boulder problems, but don't think I've ever climbed a dyno harder than maybe V8 or 9. I mean, I've done some dynos here in Washington State that get bigger grades, but I've also stood at the base of Rainbow Rocket, and it's almost comically enormous for anyone who's never been to that boulder. It's a really, really huge jump. So I just briefly want to touch on that dyno specifically. What was the process of projecting that thing like?
Yeah, it's a pretty unique rock climb in a lot of ways, right? It's one move. It requires skills that are not necessarily relevant for a lot of other forms of climbing, and obviously it's certainly beneficial to be tall. And so yeah, I mean, my kind of journey with that is that when we were traveling, I went there just to try it, and I got, pretty close. It's people think of it as kind of a technical move, but I don't think it's really that technical of a move. I think pretty quickly, like, are you going to be able to get the distance, or you're not going to be able to get the distance? And so during that year of travel, we didn't really train at all, and so I felt pretty untrained. I was like, okay, I'm not that far off of doing this. And so I think, hey, if I come back and I've actually trained in the gym for a little bit, I think I could do it. And that was more or less correct. I think, I have strengths and weaknesses as a climber. I think I tend to build strength pretty easily. I can do a one-arm pull-up, for example, before I really started climbing. And so that type of kind of just raw strength is beneficial on a problem like that. The hold is enormous. And so there is zero finger strength required whatsoever. There's actually kind of a funny, so I don't know if this was actually in the same video, but I've compared and I've seen both the videos, or it was in the same video, but there's that parkour guy who does Rainbow Rocket, relatively, well, I don't want to say he's an inexperienced climber, but certainly not as experienced climber as Alex Honnold, who also tries to do Rainbow Rocket and is nowhere even close. It's kind of funny that climbing can, encompass such different sort of skill sets and in that way. So yeah, I think I happened to find a problem that suited things that I was good at, and I just kind of pulled through it. It wasn't that mentally challenging of a process or anything like that. I just had the strength to do it, and I did it. There are plenty of V8s that took me a lot more work and were harder for me. So
that's relatable, but it's also like iconic. And I mean, I think it's maybe it speaks a little bit, to your personality and similar to like your casualness that you talk about it with, and also the casualness with which you were like, oh, I'm going to go to Peru and do a first ascent on this like extremely technical mountain. Like there's something about the way that you approach these things. It's very casual, which I find interesting and compelling. So big swings,
naive.
I appreciate it.
I think,
or naive.
I'm naively optimistic, which I've come to learn is actually a skill, and a skill that is a prerequisite to starting a company. No one would ever start a company if you thought about all the kind of difficulties that are involved in doing such a thing. And I think, the same thing is true with hard climbs. If you concentrated forever on all the hard things that are going to come up, you would very surely convince yourself that it's either not possible or that it's not worth it. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't think I've talked about this on the pod very much, but I mean, I'm also a business owner, obviously. And like, this is my second business that I've owned. And the first one that I owned, it was really successful. And we wound up all making the founders who were left when we were done with the company and we decided to fold, like we all wound up making a little bit more money than we put into it. So it was in that sense a success, but I burned out really hard. And a lot of the reason I burned out is I tried so hard to make it a really good business and like dot all the I's and cross all the T's. And when I launched my coaching business, I almost did completely the opposite. I basically just focused entirely on like trying to offer a good product and to be good at the actual service that I offer, and only like do the bare minimum in every other aspect of the business. I'm not saying that's a good way to run any business, because that's probably a terrible way to run a lot of businesses. But I was surprised at how much more effective it was for my like mental health, basically, like for survival.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a couple things. You can't do everything well. That's certainly true. Yeah. So if you try to do things well that are not actually important, you will facilitate the failure of your business, almost certainly. So that's kind of the first thing. And I think something you realize as a as a business owner as well is that there's a lot of things that are in your control and there are a lot of things that are straight up not in your control. And so you have to operate in that sort of ambiguous environment where you could do your absolute best and it either just wasn't enough or, the variables didn't conspire to make it such that your company was super successful. I think, there's all sorts of tenets we can talk about of starting companies, but I think one of the most important ones is to stay alive long enough to learn the things you need to learn to make it a good business. And I think that sort of runs counter to this idea of crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. Really, your goal is to just make it long enough to sustain the business long enough to learn from your customers and to ultimately find something that lands. And so I think if you're concerned with sending perfect emails, you're going to distract from that.
Okay. I mean, that's such a natural segue. So tell me about the company that you've started.
Yeah. So, I guess it probably makes sense to sort of talk about my journey a little bit, and I'll be relatively brief with how I kind of ended up in. So, people already got, if they didn't fast forward through this, which please feel free to fast forward through my biography in the beginning of the podcast. But they got sort of a sense of my athletic background. In terms of kind of career background, I've always been interested in starting my own company. I've always wanted to work for myself. I've had a strong urge to create something, and to create something without kind of the constraints of someone else telling me what it is that I have to create. And so I kind of going back to my academic journey, I majored in computer science, and I majored in computer science simply because I was interested in it. I had no sort of outlook on the career trajectory of somebody who studied computer science. I legitimately studied it because I was interested in it. So I decided to be, I started a company in college. It was a social media app. It was probably the most classic idea for a college student. We were in an incubator with a couple friends. We kind of all decided to shut it down because we were not nearly excited enough about this idea to sustain that as a company. Brief interlude here. I think that's another kind of interesting tenet of a startup is, and I've heard this a lot as well, is that where passion sort of plays a role is that you want to be interested in the company that you're starting because it's going to be really hard. And if you're not interested in the company that you're starting, it's going to be very hard to sustain the effort required to build anything. And so I think it's important to actually care about what it is that you're starting. Anyway, so on that front, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to work for another company, but I had no ideas at the time. I didn't know what startup I was going to start. Your mind is kind of limited as a college grad. You've only seen so much of the world. You don't know you haven't observed enough really to start a lot of ideas. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll go learn on someone else's dime. I'll work for Microsoft. I wanted to be a product manager because I, again, had this eye towards starting my own business, and it felt like that would give me sort of an all-up kind of view into what that would look like. I think another element of that as well is that I was interested less in the engineering aspects of computer science and more in the sort of theory aspects of computer science. And I felt that as a junior employee, I would have more access to the sort of theoretical computer science concepts as a product manager than I would as a software engineer, which, I guess in some sense was true, but I very quickly realized that knowledge was not necessarily beneficial to developing a career as a product manager in the tech industry. So
having also studied computer science, I can say much of the theory of computer science is like nowhere to be found in many of the sectors that I work.
No. So I would say it took about 9 months before I was very definitively sure that I didn't want to spend my career working at least Microsoft at the time. But I was like, well, I owe it to myself to at least see a different company. To make sure that this is not what I want to do. I still didn't have any grand ideas for what I wanted to do entrepreneurially. So then I worked at Meta, Facebook at the time. I must admit that I really did not like that role. I was a technical program manager at the time. They didn't really have the idea of technical product managers because Facebook or Meta now didn't really sell technical products. So I really did not like that job. And then at this point, my wife and I had talked about doing this kind of year-long sabbatical, but she wanted to work longer. She was sort of earlier in her career. So at this point, I moved to Amazon simply to bide the time. And so I went to Amazon and I was just trying to bide the time until I got to this year sort of journey. And so the intention on the flip side of that journey was always to start my own company. And so while I wasn't really focused on what exactly that company would be when we were traveling, I certainly ideated a decent amount. And at the time, I was trying to combine what I was uniquely good at with what was valuable in the world. And at the time, my kind of inklings for an idea was some sort of IoT company, so like Internet of Things. I wanted to start this smart home sort of company. My kind of idea there was that, okay, like I care about the environment. I'm good about reasoning about complexity and kind of systems that involve a lot of moving pieces. It kind of quickly became clear. I never really had any super well-defined idea in that space. So I started thinking about that more kind of once we actually got back from the Europe travel. I never had any super well-defined idea, and it kind of quickly became clear that I wasn't the right person to execute that idea. I've never really been a tinkerer per se. Mm-hmm. I like theory more than I like practice and a lot of that style of stuff. And so it just didn't feel like the right fit. And so I, throughout this journey, had always sort of thought about, how can I combine climbing and things that I'm good at? And I often sort of wrote it off as like, oh, well, climbing doesn't need more software. Like it's just noise. A lot of the software that's out there in climbing is not necessarily meaningfully adding to the experience. And so I just kind of always wrote that off. And so to get back to, so the company I ultimately ended up running with, it's called ROQ, or ROQ. And the ideas for the synthesis of this company came from all sorts of different places. So it came from a traditional athletic background. It came from missing the aerobic high of swimming. It came from the idea of not really having the sense of team in climbing. It came from the idea of that there was a lot of money in climbing at this point, but yet there weren't really any premium offerings in climbing. Like, well, what if you could build a sustainable business model for a better climbing gym and, charge more to offer a higher level of service? And so, as I was kind of thinking through all these things, these ideas were always sort of in the back of my mind. And then kind of the key sort of inflection point for what made me want to actually pursue this as a full-time business was that I kind of realized that, well, if I want to innovate in climbing, I felt that it was pretty important to own the facility. And so I don't even know necessarily what this innovation is going to look like. And this was at the time, but it seems like owning a facility is a good first start. So, hey, I have all these ideas about how I can make a better climbing gym or make a different climbing gym that caters to a different demographic. And, well, not a different demographic, but let's say a more specific demographic. And I felt that, okay, well, that's a good first step. And this is sort of the foundation on which I can build all this other innovation. So now I control the hardware. Now I can iterate on the software and actually build meaningful software, as you will. So that could be, software could mean all sorts of different things. It could range from training to actual, software in the traditional sense of the word software. But it felt important to own the stage on which the art was practiced, if it will. Like climbing is a very physical sport. It feels pretty hard to stay entirely in the virtual world. And so it felt like, okay, I think this is actually a meaningful thing. I think I have a pretty bold vision for what this could be, and I could raise money on this vision. And I've always been kind of about doing the biggest and the best and taking things to the extreme. And so I can't say that I was ever, sort of interested in, if the idea was that I could only start one of these, it would have not been enticing enough. It had to be a big, bold project. And that's kind of a common theme of my life, and to have the potential to actually, grow into something pretty big. And whether or not I take it there is still not 100% decided. Like, it is my goal for now, but you can't predict the future. You don't really know what's going to happen. This might not be my last business. It's very hard to say, but it had to have the potential to get there to kind of start pursuing it full time. And so that was kind of enough. I got a lot of validation from people around me that this was something that they, would actually be interested in. I started running trial workouts to validate a lot of the initial assumptions that I had. Like, hey, can can beginners actually climb on boards? Wait, the answer is yes. Like all these assumptions that are being made in the climbing industry are not true. I think, I have sort of a unique viewpoint on this and I can build something out of this. And that was the genesis of ROQ.
Yeah. So you touched a little bit there on some of the like programming and what's going to like be in this gym. But I guess before I ask you about that, I have to say, like, when I first started seeing stuff about the gym, you're kind of talking about like your vision for how you wanted it to be and how you thought like climbing gyms could look different. And like, valence aside of whether it seemed like good or bad or anything like that, to me, it was just like the first renders and stuff that I saw, I was just like, it seemed very uncompromising was like the word that I would use, in the sense that I was just like, oh, it just looks, you can tell that it just looks different from, I've seen lots of like renders of like what a climbing gym is going to look like. And I'm not saying that all climbing gyms are the same. They're definitely not, but you can always tell that they're a climbing gym. Whereas like when I saw these, I was like, okay, there's boards in there, but I actually have no idea what this space is going to be used for. It has some different, like, sort of clear idea behind it about what's going to like go on in there, other than presumably climbing on boards. So
yeah,
what would people be doing at this place? I don't know if that's too broad of a question,
yeah.
But like, how does it work?
Yeah, I'll kind of speak to that in so much as it elucidates what ROQ actually is. First, I'll say, I'll give credit to Chris Ryan, who's an architect and kind of runs his own business in helping newer climbing gyms and recreation facilities outside of climbing as well conceptualize what their sort of businesses might actually look like. And so he was one of the initial people that I actually talked to conceptualize, like, hey, this is my vision. Like, let's make it a reality. Here are all these constraints that I have. Like, it needs to be able to scale quickly. It needs to be able to fit into these kind of very specific boxes that I can like quickly move this to another city. All these sort of constraints. It has to support this style of training, etc. And so he was able to kind of translate that into, okay, well, this is what this actually looks like. So to comment on what is ROQ. So depending on who I'm talking to, I can pitch it in a number of different ways. And so I think the first way I'm going to pitch it here is going to be kind of intentionally provocative to a lot of climbers, which is Barry's or Orange Theory meets climbing gym, right? So it's group fitness meets climbing gym. And the idea in pitching it that way is that what Orange Theory did to traditional sort of fitness is what I'm seeking to be relative to traditional climbing gyms. So traditional fitness, big open gym, no direction. You kind of go in there and you do what you want. Orange Theory was like, hey, we're going to tell you specifically what to do. You're going to show up to this facility and nothing is left to chance. This is what you're going to do. Everything is kind of with intention, and that really took off. And there's a whole industry. It's not just Orange Theory, right? There's plenty of these. There's CrossFit, there's F45, there's Barry's, there's all sorts of boutique fitness facilities that offer this kind of package deal. You show up and you just try hard, and that's kind of all you got to do. Takes a lot of the thought out of it. And so that's kind of one sort of way to pitch what ROQ is.
I think that's like, it's either like, that either sounds probably great to people or they like scoff at it. But I think a lot of that probably has to do with whether or not they're the type of person who would participate in a group fitness class of any other category, basically, right?
Yeah. So there's that. Yeah, and there's this idea of like, people assume that the same level of intention, I make that comparison, so I don't know how many people will be familiar with Barry's, but Barry's offers like a very kind of experiential sort of product where like 10% of that is the actual fitness. And in some ways I would call their actual athletic programming irresponsible. So I think that people will immediately say that, like, draw the comparison between, oh, your athletic programming is equally as irresponsible as any other one of these fitness facilities, when I don't think that necessarily has to be true. You don't have to, like, the idea of making an unambiguous, hour-long class doesn't have to mean that the training is a secondary thought. It can still be the focus. And I think, some of the hiring decisions and where I put my effort so far in ROQ has reflected that, because it is very important to me. And so while I think that the programming is not going to necessarily apply to every person at every time. And in order to get, exactly the right specific thing for you, I think it makes sense to seek out individualized coaching. There is a lot of intention that is put behind the training program, the training of the gym, to make it such that it's applicable to both beginners and experts sort of alike. And so the idea there being that people who are climbing at sort of higher levels are kind of more easily able to auto-regulate and kind of adjust things to what they want to do. Whereas kind of at earlier levels, there's sort of ways to shepherd people through the process that can legitimately be more fun and better than having zero structure whatsoever. And so I think
makes sense. This is related to something you said a minute ago, more than what you were just saying, but the thing that springs to mind is my wife is pregnant right now. I think she's 34 weeks, so pretty far along, but she's been doing for a while.
Congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you. We're super excited. She's been doing, I don't know the name of the app, some pregnancy fitness training thing that she's been doing. And, she's gone to PT and done some other stuff too. But what's really interesting to me about this app, like I'll do it with her sometimes, just, it's like husband-wife bonding time, and it helps like motivate her, because obviously it's not that fun to work out, I don't think, when you're 7 months pregnant. Yeah. And as somebody who writes a lot of athletic programming like for a living, it's very interesting to me, what this program is comprised of. And she also does it with another friend of hers, and they enjoy doing it, even though it's like a little bit difficult, obviously, and it's like never that fun to like kind of kick your own ass in the gym. But to me, I look at some of the programming in there, a lot of it does make sense in the scope of like training a pregnant person, but some of the other stuff, it just does not make sense from an athletic programming point of view to me. But like an example would be like doing a bent over row and then a fly as like a combo exercise, where each rep you're doing both of those things. I'm like, okay, well, I can row like 3 times more weight than I can fly. So this is automatically like kind of a weird exercise, right? But there's something about that programming, even though it's, I guess you could say like suboptimal, which I feel like I kind of hate the word optimal for programming anyway. But there's just something about it that's compelling. Because it's interesting. It's interesting combinations of stuff. It's like a little bit different every time they do it. And the biggest thing is it gets her to show up and do the training. And so I can have this very like high-minded opinion of myself where I'm like, well, I could write a better like program than that would be like more consistent and more like progressively overloaded, and like the exercise combinations would make sense for the load that you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, but if she has this self-contained app that's not as perfect of programming and she does it 3 times a week, that's probably actually better for her than if she has like optimal programming that I wrote and she doesn't want to do it because it's boring, right?
And this I agree with 100%. And I have a lot of thoughts on this, but one of the certainly unique propositions, right, of ROQ is that it's fun and you can get people to be consistent. They show up and they're having a good time, and consistency is an extremely important variable, right? As you said, in any sort of training. And so if like you get someone to show up and try hard consistently, that is, a huge component of almost any training plan. Of course, there are many other factors as well in a training plan. You can't, do something really dumb consistently. You're going to get injured if you, do the wrong thing consistently forever. But I think it's compliance is a sort of under-repped component of any sort of training plan. And this is one of the insights I had with ROQ as well, as I noticed, there's a lot of stock training plans out there. And I noticed, my wife at the time was implementing one of those. And as a newer athlete, it was very hard for her to implement intent. So she like saw these exercises and she was like, okay, it was like, do, boulders on the minute for 5 minutes on the board. No angle specified, no type of problem whatsoever. There's 15 people on the board, so she can't do that at that interval, and completely lost to the point where the only viable alternative is nothing, or to just randomly climb on the sets. And so it was like setting people up for failure in this way where, so many things would have been better than that. And so maybe that was the perfect optimal training plan given all other constraints were relaxed.
But in a vacuum.
Yeah, in a vacuum. But it made no sense. It didn't work. And so I think that there's a huge component, especially for earlier climbers, of just getting people to kind of enjoy what they're doing and try hard at what they're doing. You learn a lot when you try hard, and just facilitating an environment in which people can try hard will get people to learn quite a bit.
I think that totally makes sense. I think this is my really quick soapbox, and then we'll go back to the previous topic, but I can usually tell within like the first 2 weeks of any training program, like how effective it's going to be for somebody just based on how many questions they ask me about it. Like if I send somebody a program, even if I think I did a really good job outlining everything I want them to do, and my like walkthrough was very intricate and like detailed, and I just gave them lots of, of clarity on things. If I don't get any questions back, like I'm pretty concerned at that point. I'm like, I'm a little bit worried that they're going to go to the gym and have like that exact problem where they're just like, well, I don't, there's some detail that wasn't covered, or like some piece of equipment is not what we expected or not what was available or something. And so that is maybe one pitfall of the individualized coaching scene, is it like it creates accountability in the sense that somebody's paid me for something, but it also requires that they like commit on the other side of that accountability and like engage with me to get whatever the details are that are necessary, which if you're in the room with other people doing it and with the trainer, maybe is not as much of a problem. So
right.
Okay. I think I already asked this question, but I'm going to ask it more specifically, because we've talked about the general philosophy a lot, but like what will people actually be doing in the room at ROQ?
Yeah. So, okay, I want to share one more I'm going to come back to your question directly, but I have to share one more thought on the previous topic, which is that I think trying hard at a suboptimal program can sometimes be beneficial. So the first training program that we did together, I think you didn't know me perfectly as an athlete, and I wouldn't say it was, exactly what I needed to, in a short term, have the most optimal result for whatever goal I had at the time. However,
yep.
I tried hard at what it was, and to be more specific, it was a lot of weightlifting, and I was already kind of naturally strong. And I learned what the effects of trying hard and weightlifting for a sustained period of time were. It made me climb like X and not like Y. Here's where it was an advantage. Here's where it wasn't. I learned from that. So long term, it did benefit my climbing, even though short term it did not. And it benefited me because I tried hard enough and sustained it long enough to understand what actually happened as a result of committing to that.
And it benefited our coach-client relationship quite a lot, because I learned a really valuable lesson there about if I give somebody a relatively medium dose of weightlifting and they're super well conditioned, just how hard they're going to be able to squeeze. That was a lesson for me.
So I mean, obviously that theory has limits, and you can get injured doing the wrong thing too much, and there's no absolutes kind of in any of these things. But committing to something and trying hard at something is often better than not committing at all to a quote unquote optimal programming. So that was my last thought there.
Totally.
What is ROQ specifically? So the intention right now is that 5 days a week we will run primarily class-based training, and then 2 days a week will be completely open gym. So class-based training, there will be intro classes for sort of newer climbers or not yet climbers to introduce them to climbing in general, to the boards, to the kind of general modality of how ROQ classes work. And then the sort of flagship class right now is conceived as 40 minutes of climbing and 10 minutes of auxiliary strength training and 10 minutes of rowing. And so that is the typical class, not necessarily in that order. There are groups that are doing each workout sort of simultaneously. So there's 14 boards at various angles. And so there will be, in the average class, at full capacity, there would be 2 people sharing a board. And you can think about exercises like boulders on the minute, alternating partners. You can think about exercises like 4x4s. So one partner does the 4x4, resting while the other partner is on the wall, and then they switch. Those style of sort of higher capacity type of workouts, and there's a million different variations of how you can sort of program on the wall. You can think about time intervals. You can think about drilling certain concepts. You can, every move is static, every move is dynamic, cut feet on every move, all sorts of different cues. So 40 minutes of climbing, 10 minutes of auxiliary strength training, which is a lot of AMRAP, so as many reps as possible in some fixed period of time, or end a minute on the minute, EMOM style of training. One thing I don't really like about a lot of boutique fitness out there is they don't give you an indication of what's coming, so it's hard to modulate your effort. So I think that's an important principle of the ROQ sort of strength training, like understanding what you're actually trying to accomplish in some period of time, giving you benchmarks that you can beat the next time. And then the rowing, similarly is kind of a interval-based workout. So it's like, let's say a minute moderate, followed by 30 seconds sprint, followed by 30 seconds easy, followed by, a minute at 90%, various sort of intervals to kind of like more traditional high intensity interval training style of workout there.
Right.
The idea with the rower, I mean, I will very likely have other aerobic machines as well, though there's certainly a drive for consistency within a class because there's already a lot going on. But part of the kind of drive with the rower is that in terms of a cardio machine, it is a little bit more related to climbing than, let's say, a treadmill is. It's easy to recruit pretty quickly. You can try pretty hard at the rower pretty quickly. I actually use rowing as a warm-up it's the first thing I do when I get in the climbing gym. If I'm being good about my warm-up, I spend 2 minutes on the rower, and I can pretty quickly go almost at an all-out effort, whereas like with pull-ups, for example, I can't do that very quickly. So it's a kind of low-impact exercise that enables you to try hard pretty quickly. And so that's kind of the theory with the rowers. But yeah, the typical class, 40 minutes of climbing, 10 minutes of strength training, 10 minutes of rowing. And then I'll share one last thought, which is that on the 2 days that are open gym, the intention is to encourage workouts that don't fit quite as well within that group style time constrained training, which is higher rest style of workout, so limit style bouldering. And the intention there is to have things like workouts of the day and challenges that people can compete against over the long term. You could imagine things like, the hardest 2 climbs you can climb on each of 3 angles, all sorts of ways to frame different challenges and leaderboards and that style of encouraging people to kind of, outcompete themselves. So, yeah.
Still giving them like clarity about what it is that they would do when they go to the gym, but kind of tackling those. I mean, it's basically tackling those areas that you just can't get to in a 40-minute constrained session.
Exactly.
And that's like the, if I was going to think of like what things you're really replacing, it's like you're going to get a lot of the energy system type work and a lot of the like more capacity oriented type work. But as far as actual like movement details and movement nuance, I feel like I've spent 40 minutes on my board, like just tweaking one move and trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. And it's like, oh, there goes my 40 minutes.
Yeah.
That's definitely not the thing that you're looking to replace on, at least on those like group class type days. Are the other days structured the same in terms of like scheduling, or can people just like come in and use the facility?
Yeah, the open gym people would be able to come in whenever, so they don't have to do any sort of workout of the day or anything. They can just use the boards and do whatever they want. We'll have some sort of unique features of the facility that'll make open gym pretty appealing. So we'll have slow-mo cameras with a broadcast type replay station and like replay specific hardware in the gym. So you could kind of scrub through pretty high definition slow-mo footage and circle things and compare and contrast, like you on this attempt versus this attempt versus this attempt, all on the same screen, like all that sort of functionality.
Cool.
There's all sorts of offerings that are possible that are not kind of fully developed yet, short term for the gym, around, like what sort of individualized coaching do we want to enable on kind of that hardware? Do we want to support the idea of fully sort of planned out training plans that incorporate ROQ classes? Because, we'll give obviously some guidance when it comes to like how you want to use these classes over the long period of time, but not necessarily this is exactly what you need to be doing every day, because I think that is highly individualized and different people are going to want different things.
It reminds me of those, like when you were a kid and they had the like this, this sugar cereal is like part of a complete breakfast, and then they show the complete breakfast and it has like a whole bunch of like healthier things in the cereal. It's like you sort of need to be, there's other things that are not in the picture that it's sort of hard to tell what would create that like total picture. And it's obviously going to depend a lot on the person and what they're trying to get out of their climbing, because if climbing is a secondary thing for them, or if it's winter and they are doing winter sports and they just want to stay kind of climbing fit, maybe just doing something like this a couple times a week would actually be like all they needed. But in a lot of other cases, I assume there's like social components and like technical components and stuff that they probably would want to be getting from some other, either from the open gym sessions or from some other sessions. Does that sound right?
Totally, yeah. And I fully expect there will be people, and plenty of people, and we encourage us in the gym that are using climbing as a means to just staying fit for some other pursuit. Like maybe they're not interested at all in outdoor bouldering or outdoor climbing in general. They're actually just doing it to stay fit, or just you like feeling strong. Like I mean, it could really be as simple as that. And climbing's an entertaining activity. It's creative. It's it's an activity that you can enjoy doing, and you enjoy progressing in so much as it supports that enjoyment of the activity, but you're not necessarily concerned with pushing your limits, especially in, let's say, in outdoor climbing. And so I think that's a very acceptable and encouraged sort of use case of ROQ as well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one thing that I like struggle with, I think, in my own climbing is I almost lean so hard into that like cognitive and philosophical and like technical side of the sport. I get so zoomed in and like interested in those technical details that I really do struggle to like do enough work to maintain a high level of capacity. I mean, for other reasons too, but at its root, it's just like if I'm going to be out in the gym or out in the garage for 2 hours, like I have to really remind myself, okay, like I need to do some like aerobic power training or something in this session. Otherwise I'll just forget what I'm doing and like fritter away a couple hours just like setting boulder problems and like forgetting to do any of the, I like that may surprise people, but I'm a skinny chef in that sense, like I can write those programs for other people, but when the rubber meets the road, like I just love the actual nitty gritty of the climbing. This is why I hire coaches for my own climbing as well.
And I am exactly the opposite of you, right? I think when I get tired, I don't as easily think as deeply about the climbing, and I just want to go and like try hard. Yeah. And so I hire coaches to help me stay accountable to thinking about what I'm actually doing and making sure that I have that intention and really thinking about movement and all that kind of stuff. And so my natural inclination is to just brute force, like do as much as possible. And so I need to be balanced kind of in the other direction for my own climbing, at least.
However many 15 years or whatever, 10 years of training really hard for swimming, I'm sure developed a lot of that like capacity, like work ethic, and capacity to not just work capacity, but like the mental capacity to train in that way, I'm sure is like very well developed. Can I ask some discreet questions about like how things are set up in the gym, just out of curiosity? And I also did ask for questions from Instagram, and I got quite a few questions from people. So can we run through some of that stuff? Okay. So the gym has 14 boards, right?
Correct.
So, and they're kilter boards, which I'm also curious about, but they're at different angles, but are all 14 of the boards adjustable, or there's 14 boards at different fixed angles around the gym?
So there's 12 boards at different fixed angles, and those are 8x12 boards. And then there's 2 12x12 boards that are adjustable. So gotcha. To be more specific, it kind of looks like, and I think you shared with your audience the 3D rendering of the space, but effectively, so there are 4 vertical boards, 2 10-degree boards, 2 25, 2 35, 2 45, and then there are 2 adjustable angles that go from 0 to 70. And
gotcha.
So there are 14 boards. 4 of them are what was previously billed. I think Kilter is remarketing it, but I'm not sure they came up with a new name, but it was previously billed as the home wall layout, which is a pretty different layout from the original Kilter board. It's a completely different hold set, different layout. It climbs more similarly to the TB2 or a moon board than the traditional or original Kilter board does. So 4 of the boards are that. The one of the adjustable ones, one of the vertical ones, 10 degree and 25 degree are the home wall layout.
Okay. How did you land on the Kilter board and the home wall as being your boards of choice? Yeah,
so that's a good question. I think there are a number of things that kind of led to it, but the kind of most poignant one was that, so when I go home to Southern California or visit my family down there, I climb in a movement gym there, and they have a kilter board and a TB1. So to be fair, not an 100% fair comparison, but I would consistently notice there would be 20 to 25 people on the kilter board and no one on the TB1, literally 0 people. And the sort of nucleus of that group on the kilter board were like V2 to V3 climbers. They weren't, super experienced climbers. They were newer climbers that were really enjoying the board, and they often had it at a lower angle, like 10 to 25 degrees. And so that was kind of one of the initial sort of data points that led me to kind of down the kilter route. Was like, okay, there's something about this board that is more accessible, at least to a much wider swath of the population. If I look back at my own climbing, I also kind of see the similar thing. So I didn't really climb on boards until I kind of started climbing on a board really in like 2022. And I'd technically been on the moon board a couple times, but it felt above me. And to be clear, like at the time I was climbing, like 513 outside, and I felt like I was not ready to climb on the moon board. It was too much.
Still not sure if I can climb on the moon board, to be totally honest.
So it felt like, and I could do it like once, even if I could, right? I could do like a few V4 benchmarks like once a month, and then I had to recover from that. And so I never got really psyched on it because it was kind of just too heinous. And while I recognized the carryover to some harder outdoor bouldering, it was too much. And so what really got me into board climbing was the kilter board. It was like the first board where I felt like, hey, I could have a session on this and I could come back a few days later and not feel like I was now going to injure myself using those same holds again. I think there was a tremendous advantage to the lights that circled the hold. So I always struggled to find, like, the first moon board that I climbed in had no lights. But then there were the lights that were in the middle of the holds. And I even still struggle to see those lights super well. And kind of going back to my sort of quote unquote failure mode, like if I'm tired, I stop paying as much mental attention. So I can still work really hard, but I don't pay as much mental attention. And the idea of having to find holds and remember the entire thing if I'm mentally tired was a lot. And it kind of led to non-compliance on some of those boards as well. And so that, and then I talked to Kilter quite a lot in the beginning, and I think they had a very strong sort of, how do I phrase this? They had a very strong bias for quality at the cost of other business metrics. Like they were totally willing to not release a board for 3 years, even though they, knew that they could be making money on it short term. And so they had this extreme kind of bias for kind of product quality, which I think I tend to have as well, and which sometimes can hurt me. Like, perfection can certainly be the enemy of good. And so that sometimes hurts me, but that sort of emphasis on sort of user experience and quality was important. And I remember talking to Kilter quite a lot about that. And then the last kind of element was just, for me and a lot of people that I surveyed, the holds are just straight up more ergonomic. And so they made a lot more sense for the higher capacity style of training that ROQ is going to implement. So those things, there's some element of an aesthetic component to it as well. Like ROQ is a premium facility, and those boards look cool. It's like hard to deny that wasn't a factor in it as well. Like it leads to a very cool sort of architectural space, and so that led to a factor. As to why, so I have the home wall layouts to kind of encourage that sort of diversity of setting style. But as to why I don't also have tension boards and also have moon boards, because of the class style programming, there's a tremendous advantage to me of having consistency there and working with one vendor and one kind of piece of software and one way of doing things and aesthetics. Yeah. And so there's more value in that as the sort of training facility that ROQ is versus having the diversity of having all sorts of different things, in the same way that I talked about earlier with the rowers, right? Like I could have one of each, aerobic machine, but it makes a lot of sense to have consistency there. And so through constraints, you breed innovation, right? So you can come up with all sorts of interesting things on those, on that quote unquote hardware, if you will. So I think there's plenty you can do with that.
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense. I mean, I honestly haven't climbed on most of the commercial boards like all that much, mostly just as a function of where I live. And every time I find myself in a big fancy commercial gym, I'm much more attracted to all the shiny macros and cool terrain and stuff than I am to the boards. But I usually do fling myself at the boards a couple times, and the kilter, I think the fact that it's ergonomic also creates, like, just as a climbing coach, I think that it does also, it just shifts the areas of the body that get the most taxed from being the fingers to being other things like the wrists and the shoulders, depending on how hard you're climbing. But I guess a lot of those impacts probably happen at super high volumes and probably also happen at higher intensities. So, in a 40-minute class where you're doing a lot of like capacity style stuff, I think that would probably be less of an issue. And certainly, all other things being equal, the wrists and the shoulders can take more abuse than the fingers can. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Especially
for, if you assume that a large portion of the clientele, right, at ROQ is not necessarily trying to climb V15 outside, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's, the home walls are there to encourage, Jimmy Webb just did set some crazy hard boulders on the home wall at 50 degrees. So if you want to do those boulders, you can absolutely, and, there are really hard boulders on the original kilter as well that, Magos trains quite a bit on the kilter and does some crazy stuff. And so, it certainly lends itself to all sorts of hard climbing, and the home wall sort of complements that with the kind of more intense finger positions and kind of, just smaller holds.
Different grips. Yeah. That makes sense. What other, so you have the kilter boards and the rowing machines. You mentioned that there's some strength training or some interval training with, other equipment. What does that other equipment look like exactly? Like, what stuff do you have people using in there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So for the strength training, it'll be relatively space limited. So we're not talking about 7 people doing, big deadlifts at the same time. We're talking about mostly dumbbells, kettlebells, bands, that style of training. Okay. I will likely have one sort of larger rack to be used more during the open gym time with like hangboards. TBD if I'm actually going to support, bigger, heavier lifts, probably not. I don't really have the space for that, especially to implement, multiple of those. So probably will not support, maybe TBD, but likely will not support, big deadlifts and that style of thing during open gym.
Yeah, it's like we were saying earlier. It's like you have to make some decisions about if you want to put something in, you got to take something else out, and there's always limitations. So
totally,
that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot more variability to some of these things than people might expect within gyms. So, like, sure, in the United States, I think it's pretty common that you would have multiple racks in a bigger climbing facility for these kind of bigger lifts. I spent a decent amount of time in Japan. It's quite often the case that in those gyms, there is no training implement other than the climbing itself. Zero. Yeah. If that. One of the, at B Pump, which is a huge, famous climbing gym, right? The Akihabara location, which is their not quite as elite one, but it's actually a bigger facility. I couldn't even use the hangboards there because my knees hit the ground. I was too tall. So they had no training implements either that were relevant to me. So I think, I was just gonna say people like to look at what's not there, but there's a lot that you could do. You could make that argument kind of for anything. You could be like, oh, you don't have a stair set, you don't have this, you don't have that, and so you, as you said, right, you got to make decisions about what's important and what's not going to be there. You can't do everything well.
Yeah, I don't envy you that, but it is like, when you take the Portland Rock Gym example, it's like they really do have everything, but it's also, it's got to be in a very certain type of area in the city to support its size. And just because it's such a massive investment, in order to have all that stuff and to have the facility be that big, that's a much bigger business to undertake. And it's a much more complicated endeavor to run it, and you have to have way more staff, and the overhead is really huge, and it's frankly quite expensive to go there. And there's just so many things that go into those sort of balancing those sort of things out. And it makes me suddenly feel very thankful that I do most of my climbing either outside or in a garage, which I own.
Well, I think there's more to it than that too. I think there's a legitimate advantage of being a smaller gym as well for customers. That's part of why I left BP is it's just too big. It's overwhelming. I don't really feel at home there. It doesn't feel familiar. I like that. I go to Momentum, and Momentum is just not nearly as crowded. I know most of the people there. It feels like a community. The space is smaller. It feels more kind of it's easier to wrap my mind around. Whereas like I walk into BP, it's overwhelming. Like I have a long day at work. I'm tired and I walk into BP and it's too much. Like I can't handle everything that's kind of in there. Yeah. So I think there's legitimate value to having a gym that facilitates kind of a closer knit community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one of the most popular questions that I got on Instagram was variations of just like, who is this for? Or like, what is the clientele? And it sounds like from a climbing experience or like difficulty point of view, it's like pretty broad, but do you guys have like an ideal client that you have in mind in terms of their ability level and experience and stuff?
Yeah, so the core of the customer base is anticipated to be what I would sort of bill as an intermediate type of climber. So someone that's been climbing a couple years to maybe a few more than a couple years, but doesn't have a significant training history and really benefits quite a lot from just the structure in general. And so the idea of consistency is kind of a huge boon for that individual. So that's kind of the kind of core demographic. I think long term, there is some potential to develop the demographic of the true sort of beginner and someone who's actually not necessarily super interested in, pushing their ability sort of outdoors or anything like that and is primarily doing it for fitness. So long term, that is a potential. Short term, the early adopters are very unlikely to be those people. So the experience is more probably catered for that intermediate style or intermediate type of climber. So yeah, again, we're talking about like 2 to 5 years experience, 2 to 7 years experience with limited training history. And it spans kind of a wide spectrum of, let's say, max V grade. It could be that you've been climbing that amount of time and you're climbing V0. It could be you've been climbing that, 2 years and you climb V10, but you have no, training history. And so it has less to do with kind of that max V grade and more to do with your sort of training history. So that's who I kind of expect to be the core sort of membership base. This being said, the experience does very much apply, is accessible to complete beginners from the get-go. We have vertical boards, and I've run trial workouts with people who cannot do a single push-up, and these workouts work. Like, they are totally implementable, and I think that's one of the sort of convictions that I hold that is unpopular, is that boards are possible to climb on with very limited climbing experience. It's not this like crazy advanced or it doesn't have to be a crazy advanced training tool. They are actually quite accessible if used in the right way.
That's a social constraint, right? It's like you were saying earlier about when you want to climb on the board and there's 12 other people climbing on it, like good luck getting the board set to 0 degrees.
There's one board and it's at 45 degrees, so good luck. Yeah, but so yeah, there's that group. And then for the very advanced climbers, there is also there are plenty of sort of value propositions for that group as well. So for kind of the open gym style, those are more obvious, right? It's a board gym and it's a very premium facility. There's nice saunas there. It's very premium, and there are the cameras. There's all sorts of kind of elements that make it just a straight up cool board gym. And then there's also the value of the classes. So I think a lot of pretty advanced climbers can benefit from capacity style training. And so while I don't necessarily expect people who are trying to climb V14 outside to be full-time members and not be a member of another climbing gym, I do expect those people to get value out of some of the ROQ classes. Like I see plenty of, super strong climbers, come up with all sorts of interesting games on the boards. Like how many V10s can I do in an hour? Like Fultz, and we didn't even talk about him so far, but Fultz trains, does a lot of capacity work himself. And not necessarily an indication that everybody has to do a lot of capacity work, but a lot of advanced climbers do these workouts and they struggle to motivate themselves to do them.
I was literally saying 20 minutes ago that that's me. So not that I'm on Fultz's level. I'm definitely not.
Well, you'll get there with ROQ. No, but yeah, I mean, I think and I do some of these style of workouts and I, kind of enjoy that style of workout. And I think why not do it in an environment that's motivating and clean and actually supports, like there's no one else trying to compete for the board that you're using. You don't look like an asshole when you take up the board for 3 hours. Like, it supports that use case as well. And so I expect, people all the way up to the top to use the facility, but less of those people to kind of be the most psyched members.
Okay, so that this kind of leads me into another question that I got a bunch of times, and you don't have to tell me prices, but like how does the structure of the pricing work? People can do drop-ins on classes, or they can like pay full time and come into as many classes as they want, or like how does it work?
Yeah. So right now we're running a pre-sale, which is now three entries for $55. So that could be classes or open gym time. And the idea really is I want people to actually see the facility and understand what ROQ is before releasing too much about, specific membership prices, because it's a new product. And so I don't necessarily I want people to know what it is before they know what they're paying for, basically. And so I've made it at a rate that's like very cheap. It's cheaper than, entries to a regular climbing gym, despite offering kind of more sort of features with the training by default. With the idea being that people experience it, what it actually is, and then make an evaluation if this is something for them. There will be unlimited memberships that would enable you to go to unlimited classes and open gym. I won't sort of disclose the exact price now, but I will disclose that, it's going to be more expensive than a traditional climbing gym because we're offering more service. It's going to be more in line with sort of premium fitness facilities, and because we're offering that level of service. But our as ROQ's hypothesis is that we're going to offer more than that amount of value in the training and the structure and the premium facility to make it 100% worth it. So that's kind of the gist there. There'll also be punch passes, so discounted like day entries. That goes back to kind of the advanced climbers that we were talking about, like, especially like, let's say in season. I don't necessarily expect someone who's a primarily outdoor focused climber to be full-time a member, but they can have discounted day pass entries as a result of having a punch pack. So
yeah, it kind of depends. I mean, like there's a part of me that like, I've written programming for obviously a lot of different types of climbers, and there's a certain type of outdoor climber who really benefits from having like a well prescribed like minimum effective dose of other types of training that they might need. Like some people might need like a power dose in the middle of the week if they climb outside primarily on the weekend, or may need to like fit in a little bit of like capacity style training midweek depending on what their projects are and what other energy systems they're hitting at different times. So I could see that being super valuable, potentially even in season.
For sport climbers as well, and that's something we didn't even talk about, right? So like as a means to training for sport climbing in a bouldering gym, also tremendously useful.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think for real outdoor, I don't know if this is a hot take this late in the podcast, but for real outdoor sport climbing, like sport red pointing, I kind of think a board is a more valuable training tool than like an indoor sport climbing wall most of the time. And like there are certain things that indoor sport climbing is going to tickle that a board doesn't, but as far as the energy system work and being able to kind of like train in a way that's very specific to the systems that you need for your project, I think a board is like way more useful. But we don't have to we don't have to do a hard turn into that.
I think what you're saying makes sense. I'm sure there are counter arguments to it as well, and there's pros and cons of both, but
totally.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you really quick, because we didn't talk about it, but you have Matt Foltz writing a lot of the initial. You've said that he's writing the programming, and so is it like I can look at a schedule and it just says like, these days we have these classes, and then there's someone running the class, but it's like the what is going to be in the class, the contents of the programming was written by someone like Matt Foltz. Is that kind of how it works?
So the exact contents, minute by minute, exact exercises, the cues for all the exercises, even helping develop these specific bouldering lists and what problems and why this problem is shared in this list and this list, that's all Foltz. So minute by minute, 100% of that training is written by Foltz. I'm in the process now of hiring trainers to actually run the classes, and kind of depending on the experience of the trainer, I'm more open to relinquishing some of that programming control to the trainer as well, because I want them to feel a sense of ownership and to actually feel connected to what they're offering as well within the constraints that the facility kind of presents. But depending on the sort of quote unquote seniority of the trainer, I'll open more of that up to the trainer, or less of it, depending on their experience. But for the first pretty significant element of pretty significant time period of the gym, yeah, Fultz is writing minute by minute every single piece of that training. He's coming out here twice to help train trainers, and to help run clinics sort of in the beginning of ROQ opening. So he'll be out here both right before and right after the facility opens.
Cool.
Yeah.
So is it like I'll look at I'm not sure how exactly these things are broken down, because I would have to see. I'm sure there are spreadsheets or something. I'm not sure, but it's like I imagine. I know when you were saying like he had to, he came up with the list of boulders. I was like, I do not envy him, because I can't tell you how many clients I've had where I write a program for them that has TB2 session, and they're like, can't you just pick my TB2 projects for me? And I'm like, no, I can't.
Yeah.
I would honestly need to charge $100 more per training program or something if I offered that service.
Yeah.
But is it like I would be able to see, this class is going to have a little bit more like strength endurance-y, this class is going to be a little bit more like aerobic-y, like that kind of thing? Like I could maybe even pick and choose like what systems I was going to get out of going to that particular class?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I haven't fully decided on how much sort of specificity I want to actually put up front, like on a schedule, because obviously you could classify classes in so many different ways. Yet because of the constraints, of the facility and sort of this like hour style class, they're always going to tend towards a higher capacity style of training. And so while yes, like a 4x4 is pretty different from a boulder every 2 minutes, that range is still like pretty far off of like limit bouldering, let's say.
It's also capacity work.
Yeah. Sure. And so like within that, how much do you actually want to classify the workouts is still sort of an open question. Yeah. Yeah.
Like on that same note, like, it sounds like you have ranges of boulders. So if you're doing, for example, boulders on the minute, and a person chooses to like self-sort into the I do V3s on the minute versus to self-sort into I do V4s on the minute, that like pretty dramatically can pretty dramatically impact the intensity of the workout, obviously, too.
Totally. And the angle is something that pretty dramatically impacts the workout as well. You can do V4s on the 45, or you can do V4s on the 10-degree board, and those are vastly different experiences if you're talking about capacity style workouts. And so there will be a lot of upfront guidance. One of kind of my most important principles is being, one of the principles of ROQ kind of in general is being 100% unambiguous, right? So you know what you're doing exactly at all moments. You're given clear guidance. You walk in the gym, you know exactly what to do. Yet at the same time, recognizing that there's got to be some margin for error, right? Different people are going to read the same guidance and interpret it differently. Some people are going to think they can do harder they can do. Some people are going to think that they're not capable of something that they can clearly do. And so there's going to be a decent amount of on-the-fly adjustment with the trainer and actually noticing like, hey, okay, you said you wanted to do the V3 list, but I'm noticing that, you haven't, topped a single problem. So maybe it makes sense to step it down a little bit for the sake of completion. And I think that's part of the role of coaching, right? Is like, helping someone find that right difficulty level to solicit the best adaptations.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation with people, so I understand that completely. But it'll be cool to have the person in the room with the person climbing and be able to do a little bit more of that. Obviously they're going to have multiple people to talk to at the same time and stuff, but they can provide that kind of high level like guidance on what's going on for sure.
Yeah. Have you noticed, by the way, the question for you of in what direction people tend to bias when it comes to those sort of exercises? Like I have my own guesses, but
well, yeah, I mean, it's highly individual, but the biggest thing for me would be, if we're talking about I'm prescribing somebody some sort of capacity session and they're maybe not doing it at the right intensity, it's way more likely that we're going to wind up having a conversation about it if they're picking stuff that's too hard. If they're picking stuff that's too easy, like most people, if they do something that's too easy and they don't feel anything, they're sort of going to notice and they're going to increase the difficulty. Mm-hmm. But I would say that's mostly a problem with like aerobic capacity and aerobic power capacity type sessions where it really, really needs to be, the difficulty needs to be selected really appropriately. With strength endurance type stuff and power endurance type stuff, I think it's more important that it mimic what the person actually wants to get out of it, because if it's a little too hard or a little too easy, it's just your failure is going to be at 12 moves or 20 moves, so you're still going to get some of the system that you want to get out of it, versus with that like aerobic power or like aerobic like clearance type session. If it's too hard, you wind up getting strength endurance and not getting the right energy system or the right like adaptation that you're trying to get. So I think it's a little more important with that stuff, but it's one of the chief difficulties of coaching people remotely is it's so dependent on the communication and the interpersonal element and like getting the right information from the climber about what they're actually doing, and also their curiosity about the process. So it's when people don't have guidance, they definitely, I would say, skew more towards difficulty, but that's a natural thing. People want to climb harder. That's one thing that I think, again, another totally off topic thing, but I think that's why so much of my content skews more towards like how to think about that stuff philosophically and how to hold yourself back and how to be careful about your training and stuff. Is just sort of the default mode for most people is to go really freaking hard and do it and try as hard as you can. And I think that's sick. And I also just think nobody really needs a coach. Not nobody. Very few people in climbing need a coach to be like, you should try just a little bit harder. It's like, you don't need to pay somebody for a training plan that says that most of the time. Most of the time, people have that part stitched up.
Yes. Yeah. No, that is my observation in general as well. And I think there could be a lot of value in encouraging people to pick the right difficulty level that actually leads to the reps that then lead to improvement, more so than, trying to basically, and this is a whole other topic as well, but test all the time. Like, how much can I do? And I'm now always failing. Well, I got to try that one again next time, as opposed to actually getting the reps in. And
well, I mean, like, and this is like a thing that you and I have talked about with your climbing and on some of your projects, like, and actually the training plan that we have just been doing over the summer is like a lot of what we were trying to develop for you is an ability to like try hard, not in general and not with like over a session, but to like try hard right now in this exact instant. And like, I think that kind of thing is a lot more common and a lot more nuanced, but just the idea of like, do you want to climb harder grades and are you going to choose to try a harder climb on the board? Like, super common, I think, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And to address you made a comment where like most people don't necessarily need to be told to do something harder, which I think is, sometimes true, but I think the other sort of side of that is I think something that, I struggle with certainly, and I think a lot of climbers do, especially at their limit, is like to be given the confidence to actually believe that you can do something that's harder. So sometimes I try things that are harder, but I don't actually believe that I can do it. And so I think, a coach can play that role as well. And I think, sort of early on in ROQ, somebody asked me like, well, what do I want people to, like, if I had to pick one thing that I want people to feel when they're coming out of ROQ, or when they're there, confidence is a kind of a word that comes to mind. I want people to feel secure in what they're doing. I want them to feel confident about what they're doing. I want them to feel confident in themselves. I think confidence and sort of disambiguation go sort of hand in hand. If you know exactly what you're doing and you feel good about it, you feel confident. So that's a big part of it.
Yeah. That fits super well into the 1 hour time frame too, because I think that's that thing you're talking about, the confidence and the uncertainty, like that becomes much more of a big role when you really are pushing your limits. And I should clarify, I think climbers don't generally need to be pushed to try harder within climbing, but I actually think climbers in the weight room and climbers with a lot of the conditioning, many of them, the opposite is almost true, where it's like, wait a second, you climb V12, but you're like doing bent over rows with 35 pounds. Like, I think.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that. I have a friend who biases in that direction very much. Yeah. He likes to think it's hard, but I'm like, you could double the weight and you would still be able to do it. I'm fairly confident based on how easy you make that look.
I mean, the really fun thing is to just have people, it's like, you tell them RPE 7 and have them do a one arm bent over row and they use 35 pound weight. And it's like, okay, well, just do as many reps as you can with that 35 pound weight. And they do like 30 reps or something. It's like, okay, well, we answered that question. Like,
yeah. Yep.
Cool. What do you feel like we didn't cover? Are there things that this is kind of your opportunity to talk about ROQ, obviously. So what else do you feel like we didn't talk about?
I feel like one question that you didn't ask me yet that I'll address, and I think you asked me sort of offline, is like, will ROQ cause elbow tendonitis? Like, is this a recipe to just like, get injured in that way? And I think any training tool, right, used in the wrong way can be bad for you, right? And so it's like, you know, a hangboard can be bad for you if you hang, you know, for 2 hours every single day. You will certainly get an injury. So the dosage matters. And I think, you know, on that front, I think ROQ can actually be tremendously advantageous in that the classes are limited in time, especially considering that a common failure mode is, you know, someone goes to the gym and just doesn't know when to stop. Yeah, and just keeps going. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's a relatively high volume style of training in some capacities, but in some capacities, it's quite limited, right? An hour is, I would venture to bet, far less than the average, you know, psyched climber spends in a climbing gym. So
really 40 minutes, it sounds like.
Yeah, 40 minutes of climbing, right? And so it's really focused and really quite efficient. And I think, to kind of address, is that sort of elbow tendonitis or, you know, injury, whatever, inherent to boards? And I think the answer is kind of squarely no on that. We have, you know, pretty significant amount of variety in terms of angle, hold sets, and types of things you can focus on in sort of the programming as well, right? Like, so, you know, there's the exercises, but there's also the intent, right? So if you cut feet on every single move intentionally, that's a pretty different, you know, exercise than intentionally hovering above every single hold. So there's plenty of variance that you can sort of introduce. And to go back to something that I said earlier, I think it's always the optimal or approaching optimal sort of training plan for any given climber is going to be a little bit different. And I think ROQ is not, you know, the default offering of ROQ is not trying to make an individualized training plan for any one person. And so, you know, we encourage people who are ROQ members, if that's kind of your goal, to also consult with a coach, and maybe that's a service that we offer in the future as well. Obviously, you know, two coaches that to plug some coaches I've enjoyed working with you, and then of course Fultz, because you know, he's been a lot of inspiration for a lot of that style of programming as well. So to get kind of your individual needs specifically addressed, ROQ is not necessarily the end all be all optimal thing for every single person in its own right. So
it fills a hole, though, it sounds like. And I mean, I already obviously was interested in it because I asked you to come on my podcast and talk about it, but also, like, after talking to you about it the other day and after this conversation, I'm definitely like, okay, yeah, it'd be fun to like go do one of these classes and just like see what it's like, you know. Not just like I want to see the facility, but I also like want to do a class because it just sounds, I don't know, I just don't think that there's anything really like this out there, basically. I don't know if that's too obvious of a statement to say, but it is something different.
Yeah, it's you can compare any single one of its parts to something that exists currently, but the specific integration, and I think this is like most any innovation, is unique, right? Like the specific compilation of how I put things together is unique, and it's different, and it'll offer, I guarantee you'll have fun in the class. That's another element that I didn't quite touch on as well. And I think it's important. It's going to resonate with a very probably small percentage of people, but you have to be there to see it. But I've invested quite a lot in the audio and audio-visual engineering of the space. And so, you know, I'm working with like sound provider that typically creates sort of audio environments for concerts and nightclubs and that style of thing. And this is kind of stemming out of experience of, you know, I've been to a number of these exercise classes, and it's great that the music is loud, but it's like, well, what if it was actually like incredible quality at the same time? Like, wouldn't that add to the experience? And so the audio system, I've invested a lot in it, and I've also invested a lot of money and time. And I'm not necessarily the one doing the engineering, but in working with vendors to engineer what that system actually looks like. And I think these are details that people don't always consider in gyms, but like I have architected the HVAC system so that the reflection off the specific, you know, pipes doesn't work in this way. I have noise, you know, absorption panels throughout the whole ceiling. There's a lot of factors that kind of went into how to actually optimize that. And so hopefully I don't eat my words and everybody's like, the sound quality is horrible, but a lot of thought has been put into what the space actually feels like. So
there's one gym that I've been to, which is actually an amazing gym, but I won't name it because their board area, I climbed on their boards for, you know, an hour or something with my wife, and like the speaker, there's like speakers throughout the whole facility, but the speaker for that area of the facility was literally like right above the board. And so, we're just like yelling at each other the whole time. And like your video that you take is just really, really loud music, but everywhere else in the gym, like the music seems just like an appropriate, dentist office, like kind of level of volume. And it was actually a very frustrating part of the experience. It probably pays to get those things right. I mean, it's funny how often we'll have 2-hour conversations about training philosophy and like fun doesn't really come up. But if the goal is to create consistency and kind of tackle a lot of these, like, create consistency and answer a lot of the questions, like you use the word unambiguous, right? Like, what you're doing while you're in there. Like, yeah, that'll create a fun environment, hopefully. And that'll get people to come back to it. And that's how you see the gains, is by continuing to do the same thing for long periods of time. So sounds like you've thought it through.
Yeah. One other quick thing on that too is that, like, I think, people certainly knock the idea of a premium gym because it will be more expensive. But one of the interesting things about, charging more money is that it enables you to consider details that not every gym is able to consider. And so you can iterate on the experience and, actually bring things forward in a way it funds the ability to experiment and iterate in that way. And so I think it's actually an opportunity to create something that moves the industry forward.
Yeah, I mean, that has a tremendous parallel to the exact work that I am doing, which is I offer a luxury good in the form of coaching, but I also try really hard to put like different information into the training space, and that information is free, but it's free in the sense that it's paid for by the people who are buying the luxury good of my coaching. So it's really, really not too different from what I do.
Totally.
Cool. Well, I try to keep these at about 2 hours, and I think we hit most of the questions that I got from people via Instagram and via my clients. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Any final thoughts or other things you think we didn't cover? Let me just say thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate you coming on and sharing about the business. It's super cool. I look forward to checking out when it gets. Wait, do you have an opening date?
It will likely be at this point. It'll be early in January. Is the best guess at this point, and so it's been pushed back a couple times. Permitting has been kind of an annoying part of the process, but we are through the construction permit. We have a construction permit, and we have a fairly clear path to opening at this point. So awesome. Early January is relatively high confidence.
Cool. Yeah, I look forward to checking it out in early January. Thanks for coming on the show. Yeah,
thank you for having me. I always enjoy talking to you. Your perspectives are pretty interesting, and you prompt interesting questions from me. So yeah, very much enjoy it. I did have another thought that I actually wanted to share about starting a business that I think is an important thought to share, because I've seen counter perspectives to this and I feel strongly against them. And so I actually felt like it was an important thing to sort of call out. I think the kind of high level thought is starting a business is really hard. And I think that is exactly the reason that you should do it. I think I've seen a lot of rhetoric out there. It's like, oh, starting a climbing gym was tremendously hard and it was all this risk and it was so much work and it was not what I expected and nobody should do it. I think that perspective is wrong. I think for exactly those reasons, you should do it. Why be afraid to take on hard and bold things if it's something that's, interesting to you? I highly encourage people to kind of jump into the deep end. I think you can't possibly know all the kind of hardships that will come in the future. But just the fact of it being hard, I think is not a good reason to not do something. And so I feel pretty strongly about that. And I want to encourage people who are considering doing hard things to do it, knowing that they're going to be hard. But knowing that also the rewards are worth it if you frame it in that way.
It's good advice for climbing too, honestly. Yeah. And being on the brink of fatherhood, I feel like it feels like, I don't know yet, but I feel like that's probably good advice for fatherhood too, in the sense that pretty much any parent will tell you that it's extremely challenging and also extremely rewarding. And those two things go virtually hand in hand. And yeah, in a lot of ways, having a business probably is kind of similar, but I'll reserve judgment until I'm actually a dad and I can say for sure, because right now I don't actually know. But I can definitely say, having worked super hard being like a senior level developer, doing tech stuff, and running teams and stuff, and also having worked super hard, owning my own business. Like I work a lot. Like it's contrary to what you may hear on some other podcasts where people are like saying that coaching is a good way to make a buck. Like pretty much everybody who does a similar thing to what I do does a lot of work.
The content you put out on Instagram, and I now know how much work it is to put content on Instagram. So I don't doubt that there's a lot of work that goes behind that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is like that part is very visible, but there's the vast majority of my time goes to like giving attention to individuals, and to relate that back to being a tech guy before, because I also studied computer science. When I was a developer and I would work really long hours, it really felt like a slog, and that's not to say that it feels easy when I'm actually like pretty behind and I need to go write a bunch of plans and stuff after this. Like, I always have things that I need to get to people. People are always depending on me, but just like you're saying, like there is a value in that. I feel very driven to provide for those people the best version of what I have to offer them, and not just like to get by and to like, check the boxes of what I'm supposed to do at my job. And I feel like there's a drive that comes with the ownership and like putting your name on it that I think is really hard to get when you're just sort of following through on somebody else's vision and it's not your own thing that you've created. So yeah. I wish you the best of luck with your endeavor.
Because I will always keep talking. But and even other thought to share to that, which is that like, even there's a bunch of stuff that's hard, that's out of your control. Like, I had to deal with, not being able to get a permit, and there's not too much I could do for 9 or 10 months. And yes, that makes, building a gym hard. But that is also not a reason to not do something. It is what it is, and figure out how to do it better. And you'll learn more about yourself as a result of what happens when you're trying really hard at something and you don't actually have control over 100% of it. And so I think you could frame kind of anything as a challenge in that way. And so I think just the nature of something being hard is not a good reason to not do it in itself.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there.
Cool.
Thanks for coming on the show, dude.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me.